Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
If you want a great insight into what's going on, the rift within the Democratic Party right now, then you have to read a book that has just been published by Tad Devine that is about the 2016 election and what happened to Bernie Sanders, as the title suggests, how the Democrats screwed Bernie. Tad Devine is a Democratic political strategist with more than 30 years of campaign experience. I think he's been involved in every presidential race since 1980. Here's what's really interesting. Prior to serving as chief strategist for Bernie in 2016, he was a senior advisor to more conventional Democrats, like the presidential campaigns of Al Gore in 2000, John Kerry in 2004. In addition to his political work and media consulting, he's held academic positions at Boston University, Harvard's Kennedy School, and NYU, among them. The book, How the Democrats Screwed Bernie. Hey, Tad, it was great to have you on CNN. Welcome to POTUS. I really appreciate your being here because time is more at my disposal to get into some of the granular aspects of your book and your life. And here's where I'd like to start. I went back and rewatched the commercial for which you were responsible in the 2016 cycle, the Bernie America commercial. And when I Googled it, I found a New York Times headline, "The ad that moved people the most, Bernie Sanders America." Lynn Vavrick wrote this in December of 2016. They may be difficult to recall, but there were some big things about the 2016 presidential election that made people happy and hopeful. A few of the campaign ads stand out. The ad that most stood out, Bernie Sanders' minute-long spot called America. Will you help me set it up before I actually play it? It'll be of most benefit for people who watch on YouTube because it's so visual, but the rest of us will just enjoy the song. Talk to me about the backstory before I air it.
Well, first, we got permission from, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel to use an iconic song, a song about America. And, to have that kind of music, I learned early in my career from Tony Pice, who was the editor in Philadelphia, where we used to make ads, that music is the secret weapon of political advertising. And so when someone gives you a gift like this to build on, and we started making it, and, I spent a lot of time, we began making that ad in my office, and we had an editor who used to take the dailies from Bernie coming in, and we'd send a lot of stuff out, online, and just making it and building it over the course of weeks. And Jane Sanders, to her credit, she was she was like, when are you going to be finished with the America ad? So we worked, and I actually did a version of it with Bernie in the ad at the end talking. And, because we did a beautiful shoot in New Hampshire, and I spent 5 hours lighting a barn, and it was 3 cameras. It was like Hollywood. So, and I put him in there. I showed it to Bernie, I showed it to Jane and to Jeff Weaver, the campaign manager, and they both said, I think it's better without Bernie. And that's when I realized that ad was not about Bernie Sanders. It was about them. They'd all come to look for America. So I just put bigger and bigger scenes. My partners, Julia Mulvey and Mark Longabaugh, were a big part of this, filming some of that stuff in the studio with me, making it as well. And I think with all that effort, with all those people, we wound up having an ad that really, stuck with the voters. We connected to them. And when you can connect a candidate to voters, that's when you can win.
Here's what the Times said. The ad is a montage of American images, farms, cities, windmills, offices, coffee shops, kitchen tables, set to the well-known Simon and Garfunkel song of the same name. Other than the obligatory message of approval at the end, there's no audio other than the tune and the background sounds of American life, which occasionally involve the waxing and waning of roars from the crowds that Mr. Sanders comes into and out of frame. Roll the commercial. For radio, we're just going to hear a great song.
Us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together. I've got some real estate here in my bag. Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike, they've all come to look for America.
It's awesome.
Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
Tad Devine, that is awesome. That is just awesome. And what's so cool about it, it's very Rockwellian. You know, it's a very Norman Rockwell-ish.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
and something, you know, the commercial, I don't know what it was for, a hair product, a woman's hair product, and she told two people and she told two people. Like, you do something like that in the commercial where the blocks just expand and expand exponentially and you see so many faces at once. What are you thinking as you're watching that commercial for the bazillionth time?
You know, I'm just thinking of all the effort that went into it, you know, behind the scenes, all the time that so many people spent filming it, editing it, making it better. And then finally, the impact that it had on people when it was out there. I remember Joe Scarborough, for example, and, you know, Morning Joe, the day after it came out, he's like, my phone's blowing up. Everybody's talking about this ad, you know, it's, you've got to see it. And it made that connection with people. And I also, when we were making it, you know, I was thinking even back then, that was December of 2015, that, listen, we could win this thing. It's possible. It's not I know they say it's impossible, but it's possible. And so I was thinking about, well, we're going to deal with the Republicans. They're going to say he's a socialist. You know what? We are going to take the American flag and put it in every single scene that we possibly can. Sometimes it's over somebody's shoulder. Sometimes it's on the whole wall, but it's going to be there because those are our symbols, and we're not backing away from them. We're running on them.
This is a really important point. Democrats have ceded the American flag to the Republican Party. I long have said that here on radio.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, listen, I was very cognizant of it because of Bernie being a democratic socialist, okay? And that now Trump calls them communists now, you know. I knew what they were going to do, and I welcomed it, frankly. With the Bernie bio ad starts with a graphic of the Statue of Liberty, the son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement. He went to public school and college where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. That, 12 seconds, that's the story of the campaign. And we started right at the Statue of Liberty, and we were not going to run away from that stuff. We were going to make it part of what we were saying because, he and everyone on our side has every right to that. We're patriots. We love America. We're not afraid to say so, and we were going to demonstrate it in the advertising.
So this is not the wing of the party that you come from. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Tad Devine's background is to explain to people that you came out of an Al Gore, a John Kerry background of the Democratic Party, and it took some convincing by Bernie in 2016, right, to get you on board as chief strategist?
Well, I worked for Bernie beginning in 1996. He almost lost his House seat in a very, it was a tough year for even though he's an independent, he was with the Democrats. Democrats lost to Congress for the first time in 40 years. He had a very tough race that year. One of his colleagues, Peter DeFazio, convinced him that maybe he should get some help from the dreaded Washington consultants. So I worked for him in that race in 96. He won by 26 points. I worked for him 10 years later in a very tough Senate race against someone who spent $7.5 million in Vermont, which is like spending $350 million in California on a Senate race. I mean, it was a lot of money. And he won that by 30 points. And so I had a history with Bernie. I got to know him. When he approached me about running for president, I mean, as I write in the book, I wasn't just surprised. I was shocked. I was like, you're running for president? I mean, I wasn't taking him seriously. But then as we talked it through and talked about it and moved towards it, I began to realize this was very serious, and he had something to say that could cut through. And so, I really, once we sort of went through the process and I talked to my business partners, because I knew if we worked for him, we would dead in the Democratic Party, okay? There was the Clinton administration. I had lived through the 90s, when President Clinton was in, and I had worked against him. I was Bob Kerry's campaign manager in 1992, and he ran for president. So I wasn't in good shape. Fortunately, my two business partners at the time, Bob Shrum and Mike Donlin, were very much part of, the Clinton presidency and the Clinton campaign. So we didn't really get shunned away just because, I was the black sheep in the family. But I knew it would be bad for us. But my partners, they were up for it. They wanted to do it. They liked Bernie and believed in what he was saying. So we all jumped in there, and it turned out to be a wild ride.
Hey, gang, summertime. It's a great time at Parks Casino, my casino of choice. There's so much going on there. action, excitement, entertainment, headliners like you can't imagine. Lady A headlining in December. Yeah, December. Comedian Michelle Wolf, December 5th. Comedian Bobby Lee, a lot of comedy, September 24th. Comedian Jim Jeffries on October 24. And tickets are still available for these shows. July 24, Kiss frontman Gene Simmons and the Gene Simmons Band. George Thorogood and the Destroyers on August 28. The Magic of Magician Michael Carbonaro on September 19. Comedian Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong fame on September 21. Always Loved America, the classic rock sounds of America. They'll be at Parks on October 31st, so there for Halloween. It's parxcasino.com to buy your tickets. Parks Casino is Pennsylvania's #1 casino. Street Road exit off I-95 and the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Bensalem, Bucks County, PA. You got to be 21. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. I know you have a lot of choices when it comes to YouTube. Please consider subscribing to this channel because it's unlike any other. Every day we're putting out great content. It might be front page newsmakers like today, John Fetterman. It might be somebody from the arts. It might be a rock star. I'm into everything and constantly providing you with great content here on my YouTube channel. So the premise of the book, the thesis of the book is, hey, Democrats, stop standing in front of the will of your primary voters. That's what you say, that the fix was in for Bernie in 2016 by the Democratic establishment. It all coalesced against him. It happened again, some would say, in 2020. And that's really the message that carries forth to the here and the now. Is that fair, Tad?
Absolutely. I really think we should try to design a process for president, and also in this, term as well. Let's listen to voters. I mean, we've got it going on in Maine right now. And I'm not very familiar with what they're doing, but I do know this, that if they want a process that's going to succeed with voters, it needs to be open, transparent, it needs to be fair. And I wish they would, also take into account the independents who participated in the primary, okay? Because when we pull independents into primaries and they vote for Democrats at that first stage of the process, that is the best way to ensure that they will be with you in the general election. So I hope they take that into account, because those voters mean so much, and the way to get them with you is to make them part of the decision process at the front end.
Well, perhaps you'll pay attention to some ongoing litigation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where there's right now a matter that seeks to open this closed primary process. And I think you'll recognize the name of the lead plaintiff in that action. Give me an example. You say the DNC effectively gave Clinton an additional lead on top of her other advantages. You talk about superdelegates, massive fundraising ecosystem, a nominating process designed to exclude independents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's that one example that you will give to my radio audience of where the fix was in from the establishment for Bernie in 2016?
Well, there are many, but I will give you just one that's easy to understand.
Okay.
It's the debates, the schedule of debates. In 2008, there were many, like 20 debates between candidates, Obama, Hillary. It went on for a while, started early, ended late. In 2016, in the election, really it was in 2015 when the decision was made, we were notified that there would be 4 debates. And that's all. And if you didn't accept the 4 debates, you couldn't participate in any of them. And I learned about it with a call from a top official at the DNC 15 minutes before the public announcement came. And, and that's when I kind of knew, okay, this is obviously a setup. And then 10 minutes later, I saw Hillary Clinton on Twitter saying, I accept the invitation for the 4 debates. I mean, it was such a setup. Now, that was enough to prove it to me. Later on, when the emails from the DNC got to the Clinton campaign back and forth got reduced, we saw that the Clinton campaign itself drew up the debate schedule. They controlled everything. So when you have an institution like the Democratic National Committee, which is supposed to be impartial and wait until someone wins the nomination, then it turns out they are a wholly owned subsidiary of one of the campaigns. It's wrong. And, I just think that's a great example of one of a number of things they did to put not just their fingers on the scale, they sat on it, in terms of the nomination for Hillary. Okay, something else that gets a lot of attention in the book, How the Democrats Screwed Bernie, superdelegates, because the superdelegates were a great source of Hillary's strength in terms of securing the nomination. Will you say a word about that? Because I have a response. Well, in the 2016 campaign, there were approximately 800 superdelegates. And 800 is 20% of a nominating majority. You only need half the delegates to win. So 800 is 20% of what you need to win the whole thing. Hillary Clinton won almost every superdelegate. And and when I talked to Bernie about whether or not he should run, I explained that to him, that listen, with her having this advantage with superdelegates and with the Democratic Party having a system of proportional representation, meaning no one can just go have a winner-take-all primary. It's not like the Electoral College where you win by one vote, you win everything. With that system together, those two, there's no way you can win without pervasive support of the superdelegates. It's just a done deal beforehand. Unless you force that candidate who is the front runner out, they're going to win. So we knew from the start with the superdelegates, that many superdelegates, it was impossible to beat her unless you got her to drop out of the race.
But Tad, weren't superdelegates? You're a student of the game even more so than I am, so you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But my knowledge and recollection is that superdelegates were created on the Democratic side of the aisle because of the 72 blowout, where McGovern fails to capture even his own home state, only wins Massachusetts. And the theory was, we have surrendered too much to the populist influences in our party. We need some people who've actually run and won elections, the collective wisdom of members of Congress and party leaders, and put that back into the system. And that's what superdelegates were supposed to be, a force that could determine Hillary is actually somebody who can win the race, as opposed to Bernie, he'll never defeat Donald Trump. Wasn't that the theory?
Well, that is the theory, and you're close, but here's the history as I recall it. The superdelegates actually came out after the 1980 campaign, which I worked on for President Carter. It was the Hunt Commission. Former Governor James Hunt from North Carolina led a commission. And the idea was to get more participation, because in 1980, a lot of elected officials didn't even come to the convention, in part because they were forced under the old system to run against their own constituents to win elections. So it was decided that we needed more participation from the elected officials. At the time when they were created, there was a much smaller pool of superdelegates. It was basically two-thirds of the members of Congress, the Senate, the governors, but that universe of superdelegates, after they came in 84 and then began to be expanded going into 1988. I was in charge of delegate selection for Governor Dukakis, so I spent a lot of time on this in the 88 campaign. Those ranks grew. They grew in large part because the Democratic National Committee included themselves as superdelegates. Now you bring in a block of about 400 more people on top of the 150 it started with. Now it's growing, now it's 800 people. So it took on a whole new meaning, the participation. And by the way, when we were negotiating this in 88, I spent a day with Governor Dukakis flying in a small plane to Salt Lake City, and said, well, Governor, can we go through what we're going to negotiate the Rules Committee? And I said, Reverend Jackson wants to get rid of all the superdelegates. He's like, well, I do too. We should get rid of them. We should. Yeah, he was a real, he was a liberal, real liberal,
right.
And I said, well, respectfully, sir, I think we should get rid of the DNC because you don't need them as president. But the Congress, I think, you don't want to really take away their seats. Why don't we keep the Congress, get rid of the DNC? That reduces the superdelegates by 2/3 anyways if we do that. And by the way, we can change the rules so those DNC members can become pledged party leader elected official delegates. They can still go to the convention. They just have to pick a candidate first. Okay, so that seemed like a good compromise. And then I said, and the other thing they want is proportional representation, no more winner-take-all primaries. He said, good, I want that too, because that's what they had in Massachusetts. That's what the liberals wanted across America. And I said, well, that's the biggest thing, Governor. So if you can if we can agree that you and I will be the only ones who know that you want that, I can hold out to the end of the negotiations before I give it to them. So that was our sort of negotiating strategy. So those big changes came. And then, of course, what happened after the 88 election, Ron Brown, who was, by the way, leading the negotiations for Reverend Jackson on the other side, ran for DNC chair. And what was Ron's platform? And by the way, I loved Ron, and it was a terrible tragedy when he died. But he's a great politician. His message to the DNC was, we're going to restore your status as superdelegates, okay? So that's how they got to be superdelegates again. It was politics. But listen, the system would be a lot better if we really gave voters the choice. And the system would be immensely improved in terms of winning the general election if in the primary process we could move independents into our primaries, as we did in 2016 in Wisconsin, a huge, important state.
Will you respond to the critic who says all you're going to do is drive? I was with a Democratic state Democratic leader who would be well known to Tad Devine. I'm not going to out this person because it was a private conversation. But within the last 3 weeks, this individual lamenting to me in person, my party is dead. This communism theme has roots. It's going to win. We cannot sell democratic socialism. And Tad Devine would say what to that?
That we shouldn't sell democratic socialism. We're not the Democratic Socialist Party. We're the Democratic Party. We're a party that looks back to Franklin Roosevelt, to John Kennedy. We're proud of what Lyndon Johnson did for so many people with Medicare, for example. That's who we are as a party. And sure, do we now it comes to the debate they're having right now. Do we tell the Democratic Socialists who are primarying people and winning primaries with Democratic voters that they should get out of the party? I say no. Welcome them in, because I worked for Al Gore and Ralph Nader. Let me tell you something. The weekend before the election, we were sending people to Washington State and to Oregon to try to nail those states down. A huge amount of effort. We were running advertising in places that we should have won by then because of Ralph Nader. And if he, so I don't think we want those people starting their own political party and beating us in close general elections. I think we want them to be part of our party. We've got differences on policy. We'll work it out, okay, in our party discussions. And then we can present the people with a platform of progress that affects their lives on core economic issues. And the Democratic Party will grow and will win elections instead of losing them.
There's an essay that was just published in the Wall Street Journal yesterday by Bill Daley talking about this issue. There's a piece in Politico that I saw today, linked to it in my newsletter, saying that Josh Shapiro wants someone to lay down the gauntlet with the leftmost lane of the Democratic Party, but it's not going to be him. And I suspect that Rahm Emanuel feel the same way, like there's a Sister Souljah moment coming, but neither of them wants to be in the vanguard on that. Your thought?
My thought is that so many people spend so much time thinking about the tactical decisions in political campaigns that they miss they can't see the forest because they're blinded by the trees. Okay, no, really, what's important is not the lane you're going to find to get through a crowded primary field. What is important is the message you're going to deliver and how it connects with voters in that cycle. Because I'll tell you, if Hillary Clinton had been the nominee in 2008, I think she would have won. Okay, but she was not. But 8 years later, she was not going to be the nominated one because it was a change election, and she did not satisfy that urging for change as much as a guy like Trump did. Okay, so that's what we have to do. We have to set up a system that helps whoever the candidate is who is connecting with voters on the basis of their message, not on their tactics, not on their political strategy, but on the substance of what they are saying. That's who will win the election. We should have a nominating process that pushes that forward by letting people decide the outcome.
Some are listening to this conversation. Tad Devine, who was chief strategist for Bernie Sanders in 2016, the book just published, How the Democrats Screwed Bernie. Some listening will say, hey, if Bernie had been the nominee in your cycle, 2016, Trump would have beaten him. And in 2020, when the party collapsed all the other candidates running against Biden just before Super Tuesday so that it couldn't be Bernie running in 2020, Trump would have won that election as well. You would say what?
Absolutely not. First of all, Trump's own pollster, when he went to Harvard after the election, Tony Fabrizio, was asked by the moderator, well, if it had been Bernie instead of Hillary, who would have won? He said, well, it would have been Sanders. Because the working class white voters who decided the outcome in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, for example, the so-called blue wall that turned into a red wall in 2016 and again in 2024, those guys were going to vote for Bernie. And we know that for two reasons. Well, for many reasons. One, we know it because Trump's pollster stood up in front of everybody, told him it would happen, and I believe him. He's an honest guy. Two is we saw the results of an open primary in two of those states, in Wisconsin and Michigan. Those independents, could vote because the primaries were on the same days in Michigan and Wisconsin. In New Hampshire, too, for Bernie or for Trump. They all went to Bernie, okay? And number three, if you look at all the polling from 2016, when the general election matchups, consistently, Bernie did better all through the thing. And the idea that we can go out and say, oh, they're going to call us communists and we're going to lose. Let me tell you something. That may work when you have an environment where people really aren't concerned. And, we confronted this in 2000. The number one issue in the 2000 election for president was education, okay? That's not putting food on your table. That's not war. That's not having a mass unemployment like we had in 2008. Those kind of issues give you a different environment. When you have an environment like we have now, where people cannot afford the cost of living, where there is a war that is unending in the Middle East started by the President of the United States. When you have those kind of issues, let me tell you, these labels they try to stick on you, they don't stick.
Tad,
okay? Because people are looking for change.
Give me 60 seconds before you leave me. I want to read a short passage from your book about the parallels between Trump and Bernie, or at least their voters. You write, quote, "The populist language and appeal that Trump was offering in the wake of Bernie Sanders' defeat, 2016, in the primary, gave the New York real estate developer the keys to the White House." What do you mean?
I mean that Trump was listening to Bernie. When he came down the escalator,
Yep.
okay, and announced his candidacy, half of his speech could have been delivered by Bernie Sanders.
Right.
And it almost was verbatim. All of the stuff when he talked about standing up for people, protecting Social Security, not doing anything with Medicare and Medicaid, all of this stuff was the stuff Bernie was talking about. And drain the swamp. He gave it a new term, but Bernie was talking about standing up to the billionaires and the corrupt thing. He took that. He just added a whole new dimension to it, which was racism, xenophobia, and everything else that he brings along. And he was doing it while, Bernie, who's the guy who gave him this label, he is a pathological liar. Okay, so that was a strong mix in that environment, and listen, I'm convinced he would have won that election, and I believe that his message that he delivered in 2016 is as or more powerful with voters today than it was then.
Wow. Okay. Finally, let's go back to where we began. So after the America commercial came out, I find myself newly minted at CNN with one Art Garfunkel, who literally walked across Central Park, like from his apartment, to be my guest. It was a big thrill for me to have him. I've got the clip. I just want to watch and listen to about 60 seconds of him talking about your commercial. Roll it. We're so used to hearing artists say, "I never gave permission for that song." You gave permission.
Yeah.
Why?
I think legally, finally, it comes down to, will you allow this? So they go to Paul and me, and it's the moment that you say, am I a Bernie guy? Yes, I am. You can use it.
Why a Bernie guy? Why not a Hillary person?
I like that Bernie is very upset by the gap between the rich and the poor. I think that's central. The power of money when Bernie says, Hillary gave a speech. You got $275,000 for that speech. You got to give a very good speech to earn that money. He's winking at, we know the power of whoever backed her, and she's beholden to them, and that's how America works until somebody says, not with me.
Tad Devine, let me let you button this up. Any backstory? I mean, the two of them, they made such beautiful music, but didn't always get along. Any backstory you can share, or were they in sync on letting Bernie have the song?
Yeah, I didn't know that Art was involved until I actually watched that live when you had him on your show, because we were dealing with Paul. Really, it was Jane. Jane Sanders was the person from our team dealing with Paul. And then in order to do that, we had to, as Art mentioned, we have to get the rights to do it. And we engaged in serious negotiations with Sony, with all of their representatives. We finally came to a very large number. We never told Bernie, okay, because I think he would have, it would have been a bad day, okay, if we had told him. And so but we had to do that because, legal concerns, and we had to pay fair market value. Now, in retrospect, I think they should have paid us money, because what happened was, as soon as that ad went on, America was #1 on the charts, and they made a bundle on that. Okay?
Totally. So. I can totally see it. All right. Thank you. The book's excellent and could not be more timely. A book about the 2016 cycle could not be more timely for what's going on right now in these midterms and as we head toward 2028. How the Democrats screwed Bernie. Tad Devine. Thank you, Tad.
Great to be with you, Michael.
Thank you. Okay, gang, there's a lot there to unpack, not the least of which is Tad saying, hey, Bernie would have defeated Trump in 2016. And I think also believing that Bernie would have won in 2020. And then when I say and others say, come on, a democratic socialist, he says what matters more than the label is the policy. Just what's the policy? What are the issues? People will not get bogged down by the labels. Do you agree with that? Mario, you're standing by in Bergen County, New Jersey. What did you most want to say?
Michael, I agree with Tad. He definitely got screwed over by the Democratic Party. But I think we're getting a little bit too excited about this democratic socialist movement. And here's the reason why I feel this way. You have 9 million people living in New York City, and only 1.7 million people voted in a primary. And you know what? I kind of come from the Joe Manchin side of things on this side, that unless the Democrats start playing rules for, voting and allowing open primaries and allowing independent voters to vote in the primaries, you're not going to see this rise of socialism that you see. With that being said, Democratic Bernie Sanders, as a candidate in the Democratic Party, would have probably won the primary. But when you look at the popular vote and you see how Trump beat Biden and he beat Hillary, I don't think Bernie Sanders would have even gotten close. You remember Michael Dukakis? You heard the hype behind Michael Dukakis, and he got smoked.
Right.
So, when you're looking at a national election versus a Democratic primary, it's much different. In these blue states, they have to change their policy, Michael. It's not fair. You talk about voter suppression. That is the biggest voter suppression going on right now in the Democratic primary.
Please remember that today, it's the 13th of July, 2026. I started the superdelegate conversation for the 2028 cycle because I think that there's going to be a lot of political blood spilled, figuratively, not literally, over that issue. And again, the idea, I may have been off in the cycle that I quoted, but Tad confirmed my recollection being accurate, that superdelegates were viewed as a necessary force to offset populist surges for candidates who can't win. That's the whole idea. You hear people say, oh, why should the superdelegates have all that power? Well, they are people who have had success in the system getting elected or getting others elected. And the feeling is it's a vestige that's necessary of the old smoke-filled room where candidates were picked based on allegiance, but also based on electability. This is Jody in Grand Rapids. Hi, Jody. What did you most want to say?
Hi. I was just calling. First of all, I never went to a political rally until I went to Bernie Sanders' rally in Grand Rapids when he was running. And I was reading a book by John Grisham called, let me see, I got it in my hand, Gray Mountain. And in one of the paragraphs, says a lot about what everybody's talking about today. It's a lady driving down the road and she's listening to NPR, and she says, but she always found the same story: the economic meltdown, the Great Recession. Plenty of smart people were predicting a depression. Others were thinking the panic would pass, the world would survive. In Washington, the brains appeared to be frozen as conflicting strategies were offered, debated, and discarded. She eventually ignored the radio. And I just really found it ironic. So I looked and I saw when the copyright on this book was. And it was 2014.
Huh.
2014.
Everything old is new again.
And it's the same thing yeah, for real.
Yeah. And people
find it weird. I had to read it to my husband.
Well, Jody, I think people kind of get tired of the same old, and then somebody comes out and says, I am going to overturn this table. I am going to completely go in a different direction, regardless of whether they're Trump or Bernie. I agree with Tad on the parallels between the two. It's unmistakable.